The voluntary attrition rates among teachers after implementing a teacher evaluation system tied to student test scores is now about double the national average. And that's for first-year teachers and for sixth-year teachers. Teachers are leaving in droves to go to other districts to leave the profession. There was a massive cheating scandal in DC. Teachers were correcting students' tests because their grades, their jobs were tied to the test scores. Even with the cheating scandal, their standardized testing has not resulted in any improvement in student achievement. And their graduation rates are still abysmal. Recently, the New York Times revealed the Pineapple Gate scandal, which showed the world what teachers have known for years, which is that standardized tests are filled with flaws, inaccuracies, questions with wrong answers, questions with too many answers, questions that cannot be answered. And we've known it for years, looking over the kids' shoulders with horror. Oh my gosh, they can't answer that. That's a wrong answer. We know, but we couldn't speak because it was confidentiality and all this. Now it's public. Everyone knows standardized testing is not accurate. Charlotte, North Carolina was a district that last year implemented a teacher evaluation system tied to student test scores, much like the one we're looking at now. So they enacted a test for every student, every course, every grade, which is similar to the model we have. This year in the spring, they threw out 52 of those tests because parents had been outraged. There was such a storm. And the teachers knew that they weren't in alignment with the standards they were teaching. The children were over-tested, and it was a disaster. So they threw out 52 tests this year that they used 1 year. How much money did that cost? And we're talking about instability of value-added models. Again, because when a school district or a school is measured on a value-added model that's unstable, people get upset, schools get upset. But that's going to be my job soon. So I'm upset if a value-added model that has a margin of error of 30 to 50% is used to evaluate my work. I find that unacceptable. And as elected officials, you guys have polls that you do, political polls, and I don't think most people would accept a margin of error more than 5% for a political poll. But for teacher evaluation, 30 points should not be acceptable. So I think we need to think about value-added models and their instability. Major research institutions have said for year after year, these should never be used for performance evaluations. And yet, we're still going to be using them in this system. The other thing we noted this morning, we learned from NM, that value-added is on a curve. That means there will always be a certain number of excellent teachers and a certain number of horrible teachers within the same group. Even if every teacher is brilliant, there's going to be some who get A's and some who are, I guess what, ineffective. Even if they're brilliant compared to another state. Because it's a curve. That's the nature of the curve. Talk about poverty and racial isolation. Senator Fishman brought up some poverty issues, what is under control, what is not under control, and I think it's a great thing that you talked about it. One of the things the research shows that I don't have in my document, but actually I think it is in this. There is research, it's actually one of the effects of poverty is long-term stress, chronic stress, and the effects of acute stress on children that actually has neurological and physiological problems associated with it that children learn. So that's just one aspect. The other thing to keep in mind is that just like we look at the maps today with the A through F schools, I believe in a map of Albuquerque with the A through F schools. You see Albuquerque is very clear because the northeast quadrant is very high income, affluent. The southwest area, the south out would be low income, high immigrant population, high English language learner populations, high movement among children, and high numbers of students, minority students. And if you look at the map of Albuquerque, most of the A and B schools are in the northeast, where the affluent families are. Most of the DNF schools are in the southwest, where our most needy students are. It is impossible to say that all of the great teachers are in the northeast and all of the terrible teachers are in the southwest. But that's what's going to happen if we use this to evaluate teachers. And that model supposedly accounted for poverty. The man from PED said that day that it was part of the value-added model, that poverty was part of it. It didn't work. So I'm very concerned about that. New York had the same thing. New York City does the same thing with teacher evaluations. They found that New York City teachers serving the most challenging students had the worst evaluation ratings. What about publication of teacher evaluation ratings? We've heard about this in New York, we've heard about it in Los Angeles. I looked it up. New Mexico is one of 18 states wherein public release to the media of teacher evaluations is permissible without restriction under New Mexico law. You can look it up. I found it from Ed Week. I do have an article here from Ed Week about that. Maybe, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this session, you might want to take up that, change the law so they can't release our teacher data, but as it stands now, it is permissible. New York Post released the name of a highly respected English second language learning teacher who taught immigrant children, whose principal said, I would love to have her teach my own child. Her face, her name was on the cover of the New York Post with the headline, the city's worst teacher, because her rating was so low. In Los Angeles, the first city to release data reports of teachers' names, had to recall them a few weeks later because they were inaccurate. But not before one teacher committed suicide over the pain and shame of having his name associated with something like that. We take our jobs very seriously, and we're very sensitive. We're not used to being called names in the paper. I know politicians might be, but we're not. And now we move on to something that's more personal to me, is tested teachers and non-tested subjects. I'm a performing arts teacher, so I take this very seriously. 6-year-olds in Colorado are currently taking a standardized first-grade art test where the kids list the colors Picasso used to express emotion in a particular painting. I don't know how many of you have 6-year-olds in your house, but that seems like a waste of the art teacher's time. The other option, if we don't go to that kind of standardized test for every class, like they did in Colorado, North Carolina, is we could be tied, my grade could be tied to the school's grade rating. I don't think that's appropriate. Or to the math and reading scores. Tennessee does this. PE teachers have their evaluations tied to the students' reading scores. I also think that's inappropriate and unfair. So what do we do? What does a good teacher evaluation system look like? I love that the leader of the Golden Apple spoke, because she's right on about what a real teacher evaluation is. Another one is the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards. They have been measuring the teacher impact on student learning for decades. They are the gold standard in teacher evaluation. None of their measures involve student test scores. We should look at the best system in the world for an example. And they have actually published a document, which some of you have gotten from me in an email a while back, that's called Getting It Right, that tells states how to implement a teacher evaluation system the right way, and slowly, and using measures that are similar to the national board's measures. In closing, New Mexico is in this rush to jump on this teacher evaluation bandwagon, following Florida and New York and DC and Colorado and Tennessee and North Carolina. But it's becoming increasingly clear, with evidence across the country, that this bandwagon is on fire. Why are we climbing on? The bandwagon's on fire. Thank you very much.